Well, this week we are continuing a series called Kingdom Calling, where we're looking at stories of people who said yes to God, and we're considering about how we ourselves might say yes to whatever calls God puts in front of us. And today we're looking at a story of one of the most surprising characters in all of the Bible. But before we get there, I want to start with a question. Have you ever doubted the difference that a person could make? When I was a sophomore at Nebraska Christian College, I played on the basketball team. And not only did I play on the basketball team, I was the captain of the basketball team. That's right. Forget Dr. Lang, I was Captain Lang. Big stuff right here, right? Big stuff until you realize it was just because I was the oldest player for the smallest college in the lowest division of the lowest athletic association in all of America. I mean, to put it into perspective, the college I went to doesn't even exist anymore. And I'm not so sure the athletic association does either. That's the scale we're talking about. So this was not a big deal. But I probably thought it was a big deal. And so when our team first started practicing, I thought it was my job to look around and decide who would make a difference for our team and who wouldn't. I started sizing players up. Looked over here, thought I saw a guy who could guard anybody. Turns out he couldn't, but that's what I thought. Looked over here, saw a guy who could shoot lights out. I felt pretty good about the team we were going to have that year. And then in walked a guy named Ray. And Ray just looked like a scrub. I mean, he had these dorky glasses. He had piercings all over his face. And I hate to say it, but probably most significant of all, Ray only had one hand. He didn't have a fully developed right hand. And so 20-year-old Brenden had no expectations for this guy. I didn't think he'd make a difference for our team. I wasn't even sure if he'd make the team. And I was dead wrong. Ray turned out to be the best basketball player I've ever played with. That's not an exaggeration. Ray was the best basketball player I've ever played with. And I've played with some good ones. I mean, I even played with this guy right here, right in the center, Andrew Bernal, all 5'6" of him, holding that third place plaque with pride. He's good. He's shifty. But Ray, man, he could dunk. He could shoot from anywhere. He had a crossover that was almost as good as Andrew's. He was the best. I later learned that Ray was a finalist for the Nike High School Athlete of the Year. And the only reason he wasn't playing for a bigger school is because everybody thought he'd be a liability with only one hand. But Ray refused to let that hold him back. He was the best basketball player I ever played with. He was also one of the best guitar players I've ever seen. And not just that, but he could even solve the Rubik's Cube faster than anybody I knew, all with just one hand. I've never met a person who learned to overcome adversity quite like Ray. I may have been the captain that year, but Ray taught me an important lesson: to never be surprised about the difference that a person can make. Well, today we're looking at a story of someone who you might never think could make a difference, and we see this person's story in Joshua chapter 2. So if you have a Bible, you can turn there, and if not, no big deal, we'll have all the words on the screen. And as you do, I want to give you a little context to help us get into this story. So the book of Joshua tells the story about how the Israelites moved in and took possession of the land that God had promised to Abraham and his descendants. For a long time, the Israelites were slaves in Egypt, but then they escaped. They wandered the wilderness for 40 years until finally they were prepared to move in and to receive the land that God had promised them. Here is where they are at the start of Joshua 2 at a place called Shittim. And across the river, at an entry point into the land, is a place called Jericho. Here's a photo of Jericho. It doesn't look like much. It's just that mound of dirt you see beneath the mountains there. But it's actually quite the sight. This is one of the oldest known cities in the world. It has towers that date to about 8,000 to 10,000 BC. It's also the lowest city in the world at 800 feet below sea level. And significantly for our story, Jericho guarded one of the key gateways into the Promised Land. And so if you wanted to take the Promised Land, which the Israelites did, then you had to go through Jericho. So this is where our story begins, with a couple of spies checking out Jericho to see what it would take to capture the city. Picking up now in verse 1, we read this. Then Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim. Go, look over the land, he said, especially Jericho. So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. All right. Now let's just pause here for a second and make sure we all caught what I just read, okay? So we've got these 2 Israelite spies from the people of God who were on a mission to carry out the plans of God. And what's the very first thing they do? What's the first thing they do? It doesn't say they went to check out the walls. They didn't go to infiltrate the military. No, it says they went and entered the house of a prostitute. I don't have to tell you that this isn't exactly the type of behavior we should expect from Israelite spies. But it's what they do, and in fact, check this out. The word translated in this verse as stayed, in Hebrew, it's the word shakav. And the word shakav can mean stay, as in spend the night or lay down or sleep or whatever, but it often has a different connotation. I've been trying to come up with the most PG way to explain this to you all, and the best I could come up with is it often refers to the birds and the bees. This same word is used to describe what happens when Jacob gets together with his wife, and it's what my friend wrote on my car when I married my wife. Shakav kol laila, shakav all night. This is the kind of trouble Bible college students get into. It's probably why my college shut down, I don't know. Same thing with the word translated as entered in this verse. In Hebrew, it's the word bo. This is also a word that often refers to the birds and the bees. And so if you're reading along in Hebrew for the very first time, you're like, what on earth is going on here? These spies are supposed to be on a mission for God. They're on their way to carry out the plans for God. And the first thing they do is shakav and bow in a prostitute's house. Now, in the end, I don't think anything beyond PG actually went on. They didn't actually sleep with Rahab. They just slept in her house. But it creates a sort of tension and irony in the story. It makes you wonder, how is this mission going to turn out? Well, let's keep reading. Verse 2. The king of Jericho was told, look, some of the Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land. So the king of Jericho sent this message to Rahab, bring out the men who came to you and entered your house, because they have come to spy out the whole land. All right. So here we learn a little bit more about why these spies ended up in her house. It's because they were found out. Someone figured out their secret and they needed a place to hide, which doesn't really make them look any better, right? I mean, maybe they weren't interested in Rahab's professional services, but if you're found out as a spy, what does it mean? You're not very good at what you do. These guys were bad spies. And their failure to go unnoticed not only put the Israelite mission in trouble before it started, it put Rahab in the spotlight and in a moment of decision. What is she going to do? She basically has 2 options. She can risk her life by hiding these spies. In fact, we know of an ancient law outside the Bible that said that sex workers could be put to death for doing just this thing. Or, on the other hand, she could turn them in. Be safe, be comfortable for the meantime. But in the process, reject the unstoppable God and his plans for what he wanted to achieve in the land. What would you do if you were in a situation like this? Would you be willing to take a risk for God? In a student ministry I used to serve in, we used to do this thing where every year we would challenge our students to invite their friends to come to summer camp. We knew that camps are some of the most formative moments for students in their faith journey, and so we always wanted to get as many there as we could, just like we do here at Third City. But inviting friends to a thing like this can be really scary for students. And it's not so different for us as adults. It's just like you or me inviting a coworker or a neighbor to church. It can be scary sometimes. But anyway, there was a student in our ministry named Elton. And that year, Elton was especially convicted that he needed to have this one friend of his come with him to camp. He had invited him previous years, and the friend always said no, but this was their senior year. This was this guy's last chance to go. And throughout that summer, he had invited him multiple times. He kept saying no. And so the day before camp, Elton took a risk. Something we'd never ask our students to do, but something he felt compelled to do nonetheless. He signed his friend up for camp, literally. He went into the equivalent of Church Center or whatever database we used. He made an account for his friend, put in all his personal details, which you kind of wonder, how did he get all this info? But he got all of it. He paid the $500 registration fee, which is no small thing for a high school student. And he said to his friend, your way is paid. All you got to do is say yes. And guess what happened? That kid did say yes. Not just to camp, but at that camp to Jesus. Through Elton, that kid got a glimpse of what grace is like, of what God is like. That all you've got to do is say yes. And you know what's really cool? After that camp, this kid went home and he invited his sister to come to youth group for the rest of the summer until he went off to college. And she started to follow Jesus. And then she started inviting her friends, and they all started to follow Jesus. And it just snowballed from there, all because one kid decided to take a risk, to say yes to the call that God had put on his heart. And in the same way, we all have calls to answer. Risks we might have to take when it comes to following Jesus. Do I invite my friend to church, even though they might look at me differently? Do I tell the truth at work about that thing I see going on, even if it might cost me my job? Do I trust God with my money, even though generosity in this season of my life feels like a risk? Do I begin to serve in that ministry even though I'm not sure I have what it takes? We all have calls to answer, decisions to make. And that's what we see here in this story of Rahab. God knocks on her door with a couple of spies, and she has to decide. Is she going to be for God, or is she going to be against him? Well, let's read on. Picking up in verse 4, it says, but the woman had taken the two men and hidden them. She said, yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they had come from. At dusk, when it was time to close the city gate, they left. I don't know which way they went. Go after them quickly. You may catch up with them. But she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them under the stalks of flasks she had laid out on the roof. So the men set out in pursuit of the spies on the road that leads to the fords of the Jordan. And as soon as the pursuers had gone out, the gate was shut. Before the spies lay down for the night, she went up on the roof and said to them, I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on all of us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the two kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. What did Rahab do? She said yes to God. Even though she was a Canaanite, even though she was a sex worker, she came to know the truth about God and made a decision to follow him, to hide the spies for him, to risk her life for him. And what we learn later on is that she and her whole family were spared and brought into the family of God. She was saved by faith, by allegiance. Now, earlier I told you that the book of Joshua as a whole tells the story about how the Israelites took the land of Canaan, which had been promised to them by God. What I didn't tell you is that there are actually a lot of stories just like this we found from the ancient world. We call them conquest accounts. Accounts of how different kings and nations went and captured land for themselves. It's like you'd have this king who'd go take a bunch of territory, he'd come home and he'd write a book about how great and how powerful he was. One of my mentors, Lawson Younger, he actually wrote a book about these and discussed how they are like and unlike what we find in the book of Joshua. There are a lot of interesting similarities, things that help us understand the Bible better. But what I want to bring out for you today is how countercultural it would have been for a conquest account like the book of Joshua to include this story of Rahab. Note this. No other known ancient conquest account highlights the role of a woman quite like this, let alone a foreign woman, let alone a foreign woman prostitute. It almost reads like a joke. To an ancient person, this would have sounded more like what you'd hear on Saturday Night Live than what we read in the Bible. I mean, in a patriarchal, ethnocentric world, in a world which revolved around men and their love of country, what king would want to write about how a foreign female prostitute saved the day? What king would do that? There's only one I can think of. God. God did that. In God's providential work of guiding the writing of the book of Joshua, God made sure that Rahab got the attention she deserved in this ancient conquest account. It's unique, it defies all expectations, and it teaches us that anyone can make a difference when they answer God's call. This is why Rahab is remembered in Hebrews 11:31, which says, "By faith the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient." Also in James 2:25, which says, "In the same way was not even Rahab the prostitute considered righteous for what she did when she gave lodging to the spies and sent them off in a different direction." And what I find really cool is that Matthew 1 says that Rahab was actually an ancestor of Jesus. Think about that. Jesus came from Rahab's line. And by the way, like ancient conquest accounts, genealogies almost never mentioned women back in the day. But this genealogy lists four, not just Rahab, but also Ruth, Tamar, Bathsheba, and Ruth, yes. And just like Rahab, these women were female, obviously. They were all foreign, and each and every one of them were stigmatized in their own ways. What does this all teach us? Well, it teaches us a lot about how God views people who live on the margins of society, people who would normally be marginalized, just like Rahab. And it teaches us that anyone can make a difference when they answer God's call. Let me bring this home to our current situation. Over the last couple of weeks, we've been talking a lot about what it would look like for you and me to pick up the phone and say yes to whatever call that God might be giving us. And I know there are some of you, I'm sure many of you here today, and in a church this size, there's bound to be several of you, who doubt the kind of impact you could make for God. And there might be all sorts of reasons for that. For some of you, maybe it has to do something with your gender. You know, we've come a long way in the world from what life was like in Rahab's time, and the Bible and Christianity have actually played a big role in helping women understand the important and indispensable roles they play in the kingdom of God. And yet we still live at a time when women often second guess what God has called them to simply because of their gender. I've heard it so many times and it breaks my heart. Can I do that? Am I allowed to do that? This is why I felt it was so important that we included stories of women just like Rahab in this series. Because what Rahab shows and what so many women throughout the scriptures teach us is that yes, God loves to use women to accomplish his purposes. God wants to use women to accomplish his purposes. And if that's you, I want to encourage you, especially the younger girls in the room, to dream boldly about how God might use you, about what God might do through your life if you're just willing to pick up the phone and say yes to whatever it is that God is calling you to today. Maybe that's you. Or maybe you feel held back by your ethnicity. You know, God knows the problems we face as a country when it comes to race, and I can't solve these problems here. But I can point to the fact that the story of Rahab reminds us that the family of God looks far different than just people who look like you and who look like me. People of all races and backgrounds are part of this family, and people of all races and backgrounds have essential roles in this family, essential roles in completing the work that God wants to do throughout the world. Or maybe you want to answer God's call, whatever that may be, but you feel inadequate because you're a new Christian. You don't understand the Bible. You've never read it before. Didn't grow up in a Christian home. Well, Rahab didn't have it all figured out. All she knew of God was what she had heard through the grapevine, and yet what she heard was enough to convince her that this was a God worth following, that this was a God worth giving her allegiance to. Rahab's story is for you too. Or maybe you're afraid to answer God's call because you feel held back by your past, by decisions that continue to haunt you. You've done and said things you wish you could take back. And I want to be careful to say, we don't know all of Rahab's story. We don't know how she ended up in her line of work. It's very possible, probable actually, that she became a sex worker through no choice of her own. And yet, we can be sure that shame followed her everywhere. Not just in the city of Jericho, but into the camp of Israel as well. What a scary idea to leave behind everything that's familiar, even if it's not the life you want for yourself, to join a community of people that you don't even know. And my guess is that there are some of you here today, joining us here or maybe online at a distance, who it took everything you had just to show up today. It was a battle just to show up because of the weight you continue to carry from something in your past, or because of your fear about what some person might think or say because they saw you at church. If that's you, first I want to commend you and say thank you for saying yes. Thank you for showing up and having the courage to take that first step. You're welcome here. We want you to be welcome here. We don't do it perfectly. We mess up all the time. But we do our best to show the hospitality that Jesus first showed to each and every single one of us when he invited all of us to come sit at his table, even when we didn't feel worthy or shouldn't feel worthy. This is something we testify to every week when we take communion together. We gather around a table, not a physical one, but a very real one, to remember God's hospitality, which was expressed to us through the person of Jesus. We take the bread, we break it, and we eat it as a reminder of Jesus' body, which is broken for us. A meal that says you're welcome, you have a place here. And we drink the cup to remember Jesus' blood spilled for us. Now, before we enter into another time of worship, I want to give you a chance to reflect on what God might be calling you to. One of the things you might notice now, maybe you've noticed it the last couple of weeks, is the sound of wind going through the building. You don't have to worry, we don't have some gaping hole in the ceiling or something. This is simply our way of attuning ourselves to the Spirit's leading in our lives. In the Bible, the Spirit is often likened to a wind. In fact, the word translated to Spirit in both Hebrew and Greek means wind. And so this sound of wind is simply our way of reminding us that we are trying to follow the Spirit's leading here, opening ourselves to the Spirit's leading here. And so what I want to do with the little bit of time that we have left is to give you a chance to reflect on where the Spirit might be leading you right now. And so would you take a moment and just reflect with me? First, is there something God has been calling you to? Something the Spirit has been leading you to? What is it? Is there something holding you back from saying yes? Some fear, some doubt, some worry. What would it take for you to begin to see that God is bigger than the things that give you fear, that give you doubts, that give you worry? it take for you to say yes and answer the call? God is bigger than your doubts. God is bigger than your fears. God is bigger than your anxieties. Not that those all automatically go away whenever you say yes, whatever it is that God is calling you to. You know, I still have my doubts, big ones, big questions about the universe and how all this works. I still have fears. I still have anxieties. I have anxiety every time I come up here. And yet I choose to say yes because I believe that God is bigger than the things that give me my doubts and give me my fears and give me my anxieties. And not just that, but I choose to say yes because I believe that there is nothing like it than when you step into your calling and do the thing that God created you to do. There's something special that happens when your gifts and your passions meet God's purposes and the world's needs. When those things align, that's when you're most human. That's when you're most alive. And so I don't know what might be holding you back from saying yes to whatever it is that God is calling you to, but whatever it is, don't let your fear of what could go wrong win out over your fear of the God who makes all things right. God has a call on your life. And if you're willing to just pick up the phone, say yes to whatever it is that God has for your life, I believe this is true. God will give you everything that you need to succeed.